Welcome, everybody. We're pleased to have you with us today. I'm going to give it just another 30 seconds or a minute, and then we're going to get started. Okay. Thanks to everyone for joining us this afternoon on this webinar. We're excited to have you all with us. We, of course, miss seeing all of you, our clients and friends, in person and in our office, but we're glad that you can be with us here today. We're pleased to have our good friend Doug Friesen with us today. Doug is a clinical psychologist with Emotional Health Center of Lancaster. And we asked Doug to come on today and talk to us a little bit about what this odd time of isolation is doing to us and our brains, and how we can handle this with optimism, with hope, and with positivity. And Doug's been a good friend of the firm and a good personal friend of ours for a while. So we're really pleased to have him with us today and eager for you to listen to what he has to share. So don't hesitate to ask any questions you have as we go along. You can type them either into the question box there you see or the chat feature as well. And we'll be taking questions at the end of Doug's talk. And so we encourage you to use that as they come up. So with that, Doug, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Gary, and thanks for everyone to be here. And I normally start off by saying something about this being a fine-looking audience, but I can't see any of you, so I'll just assume you're out there, and I'm picturing you looking at me and listening intently. But it's a unique time in our world, and it's a unique time to be presenting in this format, but I'm glad we can do that. So thanks to Gary and Lyle and the team for inviting me to talk about how do we stay connected in these anxious times. As Gary said, I'm a licensed psychologist. I've been in practice for over 20 years. My practice includes adults, couples, families. I do some work with children and teenagers as well. So in many ways, I'm privileged to hear the ways that people are creatively coping with this sudden change to our lives. And we certainly have had to be creative. And we'll talk about ways to cope and how this has affected us. Before I go on with that, I also want to say I'm thankful for the support of my wife, Tina, and we have 3 children, but I don't think they're listening or tuning in right now. So yeah, we're living in strange, unique times. I don't think any of us have ever had to be quarantined like this before. And so I'm glad to share with you some ideas about coping with the anxiety and the importance of connection. Gary used the word isolated, and I think that is our danger. One of the things I want to say is we don't want to become isolated, even though we do need to keep our distance. For some, this has been like almost a welcome relief. One of my more introverted clients said, "Hey, I've been social distancing all my life. This is nothing new for me." But really, we all need contact. We all need connection, and maybe some of us have benefited from the break in our schedule to be less busy, not to be running and traveling so much. So we have all had to adapt. But for many, this coronavirus pandemic has been very disorienting, and it makes sense that it might be anxiety provoking. It's a serious illness, and we've all been impacted in some level. Even if we don't fear for our own health and well-being, we might fear for older loved ones or persons in our lives that might be more vulnerable. So no doubt it's been unsettling and anxiety provoking. These fears are real. So in some ways, the anxiety you have or you fear might be very specific. You might know exactly what it is. It might be related to your job or income. It might be related to health concerns, changes in your schedule. For others, the anxiety could be more vague and like an underlying low grade stress. Um, I've often compared this type of anxiety to like a computer program that's running in the background. I'm not a computer expert, but I know certain programs can bog down the system. And I think that's what people often describe to me when they've dealt with low grade anxiety or stress. It feels like they're less efficient and just wears you down. This is what stress does. It robs us of energy, efficiency, and we might not even know it's there. So I'm glad we're able to talk about this today. And certainly that's one of the first steps, is to realize you're not alone. And maybe in reaching out and talking to others, you'll find out your feelings are not that different. We're all feeling some level of pain and distress. One thing I heard recently is suffering is not a zero-sum game. We all know maybe students who've had to lose something very significant. Maybe it's a sports season or a musical. For seniors, they're losing out on prom or graduations. So it's a loss. It could be tempting to say, well, I shouldn't be upset about that because other people are having more significant losses, or this person lost a grandparent. But everyone needs to acknowledge their experience is important and pay attention to feelings. And we're going to talk more about how to do that, how to pay attention to even our bodies in times like this, because they can often signal us. You might not be able to see it on my whiteboard, but the phrase "we are in this together" has been important one to think about during this time. But certainly good things can come out of a situation like this, a crisis like this. Think about a time maybe you were in a new city, you're visiting a new place, and you just want to look around and take in the sights and the experiences and the buildings. But then you notice the people that live there are just sort of going about their business, and they're not even aware of what's around them. The phrase I heard recently, we have to become a tourist in our own lives. This has caused us to change patterns, to look at things differently. Maybe some of these patterns will change for the good. Maybe we end up slowing ourselves down, or doing more game nights with our families, or going on more hikes because of what we've had to do now. We're looking at our lives with fresh, new eyes. So a book that I'm going to reference a little bit here, and I don't have the cover to show you, but Gary said he's going to send out an email, a follow-up email after this, and so I can make sure any references that I talk about here will be available to you if you're interested. And certainly also any contact information for me if there's something you want to talk to me about more specifically. But the book is called, interestingly enough, The Rabbit Effect: How to Live Longer, Happier, and Healthier with Groundbreaking Science of Kindness. And the author is Kelly Harding. And probably one of the phrases I like to use is connection heals and disconnection harms, or disconnection hurts. So you can even maybe experience this if you have a pet, how sometimes just being close to another living thing, an animal, just makes you feel better. It's important to note that while physical distancing is good for the control of this virus, social support and connection is healing and much needed. Physical distancing doesn't mean we need to become isolated and lonely. And so that's really a big part of what this book, The Rabbit Effect, goes into. The study that gives the book the title is one I didn't know about, but I read about. It took place in the late 70s. And at that time, researchers were trying to understand how an unhealthy, high-fat diet could impact the risk factors like heart disease, high blood pressure or increased cholesterol. So they tested these New Zealand white rabbits. They gave them bad food, a high-fat diet, consistently for a couple of weeks. And after a few months, at the end of the study, the rabbits were evaluated on these factors like high blood pressure, cholesterol. And they weren't too surprised by some of these findings. They were pretty identical to each other. However, the lead researcher, Dr. Robert Narum, he did one final step and wanted to look at the rabbits' little blood vessels. And he anticipated that they would all have destructive fatty deposits in their arteries. But as it turned out, there was a large variation in these fatty deposits of some of the animals. Just one cohort didn't show these problems. In fact, there were 60% fewer deposits than the others. They had no idea what would cause this. And so they did some further investigations and found out this one group of animals, these rabbits, were under a specific researcher's care. And guess what? This researcher was new to the staff. She was particularly kind and caring individual. She didn't just give the animals their food, but instead, when she fed them, she picked them up and she talked to them and she petted them and she cuddled them. She was just really kind. That's just who she was. So they found out that these animals, again, did not show these problems. The risk factors were much lower. They replicated this study under much more controlled conditions, and they replicated the same results. And they summarized, if you take a rabbit and give it an unhealthy lifestyle, but you talk to it, hold it, and give it affection, many of the adverse effects of the bad diet disappear. The relationship, the contact makes a difference. So it doesn't just sound good on paper that we need to stay connected. It actually makes a big difference. And the book looks at several chapters on community life and connection and how it has significant impacts on medical issues in our country. We don't want to become totally lonely or disconnected. Another quick study I want to mention, we know that older adults and seniors right now are pretty high risk. And, so they're not allowed to have visits from their families. And so touch and affection are probably limited. And this next study looked at older patients who not only had a visit, but also a brief shoulder massage. The ones who got just a visit did okay, but the ones who had the visit plus some physical touch and massage had a better outcome in terms of measures of cognitive and emotional benefits. So physical touch and closeness is important. So hugs aren't just a good idea. Somebody once said you need to get about 7 hugs a day. I don't know if that's a magic number, but it actually has direct ramifications for our immune system. So if you're watching this with somebody, you can go ahead and take a pause here, and this is the time to give that special someone a hug. I can wait. But definitely, when you read things like this, it makes you you want to reach out to someone and be close. If you have a pet or an animal at home, again, you know that can be good for your well-being. There's dangers to loneliness. Even though we have technology and social media, 1 in 5 adults still report feelings of chronic loneliness. We all may feel a little bit lonely and disconnected at times. So I want to stress that what I'm about to tell you is really dealing with persistent, prolonged feelings of loneliness, and it's a serious issue. So when we are cut off and lonely and feel lonely for an extended period of time, it ranks right up there with the big problems that we already know about, like obesity, physical inactivity, high blood pressure, and bad cholesterol. In fact, the study shows that chronic loneliness can increase the risk of heart disease and stroke by 30%. It's hard to believe this, and I had to read it a few times. Being lonely turns out to have similar risk factors to smoking about 15 cigarettes a day. So again, it's sort of making the point that we're here to talk about today. It's important not to become isolated. And as a community, we need to be aware of friends and family who might be at risk for loneliness and social isolation. A lot of patterns have changed. We're not able to go to church. We're not going to the gym. Um, they just opened the golf courses, So we haven't been able to do our normal, typical patterns of relating, and it increases risk factors. At our house, my wife had the idea to help our kids make some homemade cards for some of the older folks in our church. And it probably brought a smile to their face, and a number of them wrote nice notes back to us that they felt appreciated by these cards. So little gestures like this, even though we can't be close in proximity, can help us feel connected. A loneliness loop is something that can happen pretty quickly. Maybe someone feels a little bit disconnected, and if they go out with friends and maybe it doesn't go well, or something happens where they feel embarrassed or humiliated, certainly something like a panic attack, can start to send messages just to stay in, don't go out. And the next time they get invited out, they decline it, and then pretty soon nobody's asking them to go out anymore. So these kind of loneliness loops, even if we could have contact with each other, become dangerous. Sometimes it takes energy to reach out and ask for help or make contact. I've been pleased that this has actually given me reason to reach out to some college friends, to make a Zoom call with some guys I hadn't talked to for a while, and I know others are doing that. So while we as a country spend millions and millions of dollars on diets, supplements, and medicines, research is saying that hugs and acts of kindness and not being alone and cut off are some of the best things we can do for our well-being. I'm going to move to section 2 of my presentation here, which is dealing more specifically with anxiety, since we talked about isolation and loneliness in the first part. Again, normal to feel some anxiety about our health or safety, about persons who might be at higher risk. Certainly the economy and our financial situation, job status, those are all on people's minds right now. Anxiety can be normal and can actually be a good thing. I felt some anxiety early this week, and it prompted me to sit down and kind of put the ideas that I've been juggling in my mind into a more organized form. So that anxiety about how this presentation would go prompted me to take action. It's good to feel anxious, by a dangerous highway, so we don't walk out into traffic or stay back from a cliff, for example. Some anxiety is productive. But I think what I want to talk about today is how anxiety can spin out of control and become an unhealthy form of worry, an incessant fear. Chronic anxiety and stress are very detrimental. And one of the amazing things about the human brain is the capacity to think ahead and to plan. You knew there was this talk today, and maybe you planned the ways to make that into your schedule. Thinking ahead can also be a problem, though, because it can lead us to sort of a what if thinking. What if I get sick? What if I have to go to the hospital? Some might call this a kind of a worry chain, where a small worry sort of starts to morph into a much bigger, more destructive worry. And if these worry chains keep happening, they can really take a physical toll. You feel a little short of breath, and the next thing you know, in your mind, you're picturing yourself on a ventilator. And don't get me wrong, those fears are there for all of us, but it's important to notice that these kind of worry chains are happening. This worst case, sometimes you may have heard it called catastrophic thinking, is happening because it takes a toll on us. One thing I want to stress is, it's easy to think of worry as a mental thing, as a thinking problem. But research would say that we often feel anxiety in our bodies before we begin to worry. Our mind is actually picking up cues from the body. It's sort of a feedback loop. If you've ever been jolted awake at night, maybe you can see a connection there. When we're breathing shallow and our shoulders get tense, this might say, oh, there must be some danger. There must be some threat. So sort of a take home I want to stress is worry and stress and anxiety are not just thinking problems. They can be something that is harbored in our body. And in fact, that's where I would want to start with somebody who is maybe treating for anxieties to help them recognize their body. Just we live in such a busy, fast-paced society that we almost lose touch with ourselves. Um, so it's hard to feel anxious when the body is relaxed. Go ahead, say that out loud to yourself. Nobody else can hear you. It's hard to feel anxious when your body is relaxed. So when we start to focus on our bodies and relaxing our bodies, a lot of that can have positive ramifications for the anxiety. We know a little bit about the symptoms of anxiety. You've probably heard these: muscle tension, some chronic aches and pains, gastrointestinal issues are sometimes where the stress shows up, restlessness, unable to sit still, relax, difficulty concentrating. Sleep is a big thing. I'm always asking people about sleep because it's one of the building blocks for good mental and emotional functioning is getting good rest and sleep, because you're going to feel tired the next day. Rumination or being fixated on certain things, we just can't let go of it, can't drop the worry thought. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, as you know, is a form of anxiety where you feel anxious, maybe about germs. And we're all washing our hands more, so don't be too hard on yourself. But if that worry thought about germs and washing hands gets too closely paired, then it becomes really a disruptive disorder in your life. Anything can trigger worries. It's fairly common to have some extreme, kind of bizarre thoughts once in a while. For most of us, it doesn't take hold and just passes by. But there's some unique things about this pandemic, I think. We're all living with a few things that all kind of come together that cause uncertainty. It's ambiguous. We don't know how this is going to go. There's lots of unknowns about this. It's also novel and new. No one's ever lived through something like this, at least in our generations. And it's very unpredictable. And that's one of the big topics I hear in my therapy office. If I knew when it would end, if I knew it was going to be over in June, I could make it. If I knew, tell me it's going to be back to school in August, and I'd feel okay. But there are no promises, no predictions that we can certainly draw upon totally. So, if you have a phobia of flying, but with help and mental relaxation and some strategies, you get on a plane and you have a good flight experience, the next time around, the flight won't be so anxiety provoking. You can draw upon the experience, but because this is so novel and new and unpredictable, we don't have anything to draw upon. Another thing to think about with worry is it real life or is it hypothetical? A real life worry, we all may have something like this, I need to work, but my kids are home from school and I don't have appropriate childcare. That is a real worry. And again, it would prompt some action, hopefully some action that would be helpful to take care of that worry. But a hypothetical worry is kind of what I mentioned earlier. Well, if I can't find anybody to take care of my kids, I have to quit my job. And if I quit my job, I'll lose my income. And the next thing is we'll be out on the street. And, you just have to be careful that those extreme chains of worst case thinking, hypothetical worries don't take hold. Like I said, some worry is normal, can be helpful. Excessive worry really takes a toll on you, mentally draining, demoralizing. Suddenly we don't have energy. And that's, again, where worry and depression sort of start to come together. We're so worried, we don't want to get up and face the day, start losing motivation. And it's hard to do the things that might make us feel better. Reach out to someone, get some exercise, those type of things. One thing I do with kids I see or teenagers is try to make worry the problem. Instead of seeing it inside ourselves, we try to make it the problem. And worry wants to boss you around and tell you lots of negative things, perhaps. But so I tell the kids, who's the boss? Are you the boss or is the worry the boss? And right now, the worry and some of these fears want to boss us around. So we need to sort of stand up to it and say, I'm not going to let you boss me around. So in this sort of last third section, what can be done? What can be done about isolation, feeling cut off? What can be done about anxiety so that the fears don't become bullies that bring us down and cause more problems? So my top 10 list of things to do, and I think I have 10 here. I'll try to keep count, but and again, if any part of this you would want this as a resource, I'd be glad to try to connect with you about that. And Gary will send out my contact information as a follow-up. This is no order, no particular order, but balance is a big one. And this is important in many ways. We need balance of rest. We need to balance rest and productivity. We all need some alone time, but connection with others is valuable, as we've talked about. It's been great to hear families planning fun and pleasurable activities. We need things to look forward to. People have been really creative, going for hikes, bike rides. Some, maybe one of you has taken up a new hobby or started a new ritual with your family. These are all very important. The news, I can sometimes hear when people have been watching the news a lot, how that creates stress. And I'm not against the news, but I think, again, this fits under the balance category. If the news is just constantly running, it can start to wear down because the news brings some of the more extreme stories that are happening. We need to be informed, but sometimes we need to know when to turn off the news. Number two, recognize when normal worry is starting to morph into that excessive hypothetical worry. Gently assess yourself to ask, is this worry normal, or am I getting into that worst case thinking? How can I have a compassionate response? I know I'm being low tech today. I'm not doing a PowerPoint with this. I hope you can see. Just sometimes I use a cheat sheet like similar to this that says, name the situation. What's causing you stress? Where do you feel it? What is the feeling like? Stress, anger, agitation. What is the anxious thought saying? It's never going to get better. I'm going to get sick and die. And then the last column, probably the more important one, is this compassionate response. It's normal to be worried. You're healthy, and you have a good support system to help you through something if it happens. Compassion doesn't mean, oh, don't worry about it, you're going to get fine. That's positive thinking isn't just trying to throw out worry. Positive thinking is trying to find hope and compassion and be kind to yourself. Number three is breathe. One of my favorite things to talk about is breathing, especially when it comes to anxiety disorders. When we're anxious, stressed, what do? We start to get a little bit closed up, take shallow breaths. That perceived threat or danger causes the nervous system to go into high alert. You've heard that phrase, fight, flight, or freeze. This can be helpful. It helps us get ready to run if we need to. My wife will still laugh when she tells a story about how high I jumped when we were walking in the park one day and I heard something rustle in the leaves. I was ready for a big bear to come out of the woods, and I think it was probably a squirrel or something like that. But my fight, flight, or freeze mechanism went into high alert, and sometimes that's adaptive, but another times it's counterproductive, especially if it's on over. So there's no perfect way for breathing. I'm going to give you some numbers. In kids like this, but adults certainly too. 4, 2, 6. 4 is the in breath, usually through your nose. Hold for like a 2. Okay. Again, this doesn't have to be something you do over and over, just a few of those nice slow in breaths for a count of 4, hold for at least 1 count, maybe 2, and then that nice long exhale. again, studies have shown that brings the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms things down, into effect, so that nervous system goes from high alert. You're driving home at night, you see flashing lights behind you, and your body kind of jolts into high alert, thinking, "What did I do? Am I going to get pulled over?" And you've all felt this maybe. And then the police officer goes flying by you. Quickly, you take a breath and you settle yourself down from that aroused state. Another anxiety tip is just to learn to set it aside. Letting worry know you're in charge rather than it's in charge. Maybe even giving yourself permission to have a worry moment for 10 or 15 minutes. And then you talk to it and kind of say, "Worry, all right, I'm done. I'm done with this. I'm moving on to something else." The goal with worry is not to get rid of it. The goal is to manage it. With kids, I sometimes ask them to show me with their hands, how big is the worry? And they often come like this. And what can we do to make it a little smaller? Everybody wants it to be here, but that's probably not realistic. A little bit more manageable size of worry can help us feel a lot better. Next, something I've just kind of developed is called the 5 Gs. Gary starts with G, but you're not on this list, Gary. And again, this might be something I could email out if somebody wants it, but I was noticing these words kept coming back in some of my work with people who are dealing with anxiety or just general life issues. Growth. First word I come to is G for growth. Life is about growing. We're all learning and growing through this time. New patterns might be developed to stay with you. Life is a journey. The second G word is gentle. We need to acknowledge this is hard. This has created stress and inconvenience in a lot of ways. We need to be gentle with ourselves, be gentle with those around us, compassion. One of the biggest problems we sometimes have in the mental health field is somebody feels bad, they feel down, they feel anxious, and then they feel angry with themselves for for feeling bad, and they minimize their own experience. To be gentle with themselves and say, I had one person the other day said, "You know what? I just know I have some sad days once in a while, and I'm learning to be okay with that." That's an example of what I mean by gentle. Grace is the third G word. We're going to make mistakes when we're stressed. We might get short fused. We might say or do things that we want to take back. Others will do that. We need grace and forgiveness. Again, sometimes this is easier to offer to others than to offer to yourself, but practicing grace and acceptance with yourself is important. Gratitude, another G word. Right now, it's easy to focus on what's going wrong around us. Kids are missing out on school, sports activities. We can't see our friends, go to church. Like I said, couldn't even go golfing last month, but now maybe we can start to do some things like that. But what about noticing things to be thankful for? The kids can still learn the beauty of the spring season. It sounds cliche, but can we stop and smell the roses? We had a beautiful spring day. We're all going to get outside a little bit this evening and hopefully enjoy this nice evening. The last G, I'm cheating a little bit because it's actually 2, but is the word gift. Life is a gift. Let's not forget that. And since I'm talking with the financial advisors group here, the word generous also came to mind. Not just being generous with our resources, but generous with our time, generous with our compassion, and just the efforts. It's so good to hear these stories. Some Good News is a website. Let's hear those good stories of generosity, of people giving of their time to help out others, to pick up groceries, to visit people who are stuck inside, those type of things. Number 6, body awareness. Again, anxiety isn't just in the head, it can be down in the body. And that's where we start to take care of our bodies with regular sleep and exercise. Food is not such a great coping mechanism. It's tempting for all of us, but exercise is one of the best natural ways to deal with stress. And it's been great to see so many people out walking in my neighborhood. There's a lot of walkers, and especially on a nice spring night, to get outside, to breathe, and it's good all around for our bodies. Mindfulness, number 7, just learning to slow down and pause. This whole coronavirus has made us all slow down in some ways. I hope something you do after this talk is maybe learn to check in with yourself and just, what am I feeling? What am I holding in my body right now? What's this stress about? How can I tend to it? You want to let those worry, stressful thoughts, a mindful exercise is sort of let worried thoughts pass on by like a cloud. Some of you may know the serenity prayer. Lord, help me give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the important wisdom to know the difference. How often do we stay stuck on things that are out of our control? If it's something we can change, courageously and with support of others, how do we make a change? Number 8, reach out, stay connected. We talked about that. We've seen driveway visits, birthday parties where cars drive by honking horns. I think we can't underestimate the importance of just still having contact and seeing each other's faces. What that does for us. I think even a Zoom call, church online can still help people feel connected and not alone. Some of you might be having questions about children, and certainly children feel the anxiety, and they need to be informed, especially if they're older. You want them to be able to ask questions. We don't want to shelter them, but we also don't want to expose them to unrealistic fears and anxiety. Again, the goal isn't to eliminate it and feel no anxious thoughts or feelings, but to make it manageable. So encouraging kids to talk and express themselves, and don't give them false promises. We can't just say easy things like it's all going to be okay, and it's more important to say things like it makes sense what you're feeling, and I'm here for you, and let's keep talking about this. And so those are the main things. Number 10, I just made a little point about finding balance, exercise, social connection. These are natural ways to stay emotionally healthy. But it's not unheard of, and certainly people are reaching out for professional help from psychologists like me or mental health professionals. Just talking and having a safe place to process some of your feelings is important, and I'd certainly be willing to help any of you, resource you if you need to know where to reach out, where to find support systems professionally. Medication is, there's specific medications that help with anxiety levels. And this is more reserved for extreme cases where functioning is becoming impaired. But many people find benefits from medication and the supportive therapy. So I've covered a lot of ground here, and that's probably where I'm going to stop right now. So Gary, if you're there, I'll wait for you to let me know if any questions came through.
Yeah, thanks so much, Doug. So many helpful tips and piece of research, I think, for us to take away, and do have a couple of questions here for you to go through. So you started with talking about this study on rabbits and how the ones who were held and given affection were actually physically healthier than those who weren't. And I know there's a similar study done on a very tight-knit group of, I think it was an Italian community, who was very close as a family. They did a lot of family things, kind of lived in community, but they had horrendous habits. They smoked a lot, they drank a lot, they ate a really unhealthy diet, yet they had
lots
this.
Of pasta, probably.
Yeah, right. Pasta and cured meats and all that good stuff. And they ended up having insanely long longevity, above average longevity. And so my conclusion from that was, okay, I can eat a lot more cheeseburgers and drink a lot more milkshakes than everyone's telling me, as long as I stay connected. Am I right on that, or can you help bring that to a little more balanced point of view?
Yeah, great question. I think I'm aware of that study, and I think the book rabbit effect that I referenced cites similar studies where these close-knit communities where they celebrate weddings and often large family gatherings are the norm, and everybody, somebody loses a loved one and everyone's there to surround them. We don't have quite those tight-knit communities like we used to maybe. I don't think, Gary, the take home is that you can eat whatever you want as long as you get enough hugs and cuddles from your little one. But I think it's pretty clear that it's not just, it doesn't just feel good. It acts, it actually makes a physical medical difference for many people. In fact, the study started, if I'm remembering right, because a doctor was just saying, hey, this community is, people are not dying of heart attacks, and the stroke people are living into their 90s, and there's not strokes and high cholesterol. And he doesn't, looking around him, he didn't see that people were jogging and exercising and doing those type of things. So it is the power of connectedness and not feeling alone, I guess, to reiterate your point there.
So maybe the conclusion of that was part of a healthy lifestyle, which we might normally think of diet and exercise as the main components of a healthy lifestyle, should also include the relational connection with those around us. Would that be an accurate way to state that?
Yeah, thank you. That's a nice summary. Right. I mean, somebody who is going to the gym and eating healthy, but they're really disconnected and lonely, and they don't have a workout buddy, or they don't go for walks with anyone, or don't have a faith community, or they're not part of something larger than themselves. They might be missing out on the benefits that could come from that. Sure.
Yeah, great. Yeah, a few more questions. One of the things that you talked about a lot throughout is the recognition of the emotions we're having. And so the question is, why is it so important to start with recognizing our emotions, whether that emotion is anxiety, fear, worry, anger? Why is that so important as a foundation to getting past maybe some of those negative emotions that we're feeling?
Yeah, well, thank you. Whoever asked that, it's a good question. Well, acknowledgement is really the first step of anything. If we don't acknowledge that we're feeling fearful, it doesn't allow us to tend to it, as I would say. And by tending to it, it could be talking about it with a close person, or just acknowledging its existence. If we've been living in a high arousal state or highly anxious state, and we don't have ways to talk about it, we're going to have more of the same. So doing that sort of check-in, emotional check-in, or bodily check-in that I talked about is so important, because that's the starting point. If we don't have a name for it, then there's not much we can do for it, So, and I feel like I sometimes hear that from people if I'm asking if therapy is helpful, and I want to say maybe it's my wise support and advice, but sometimes I say it just helps to be able to talk to someone. It helps to know I'm not alone in this.
Sure.
So if we don't acknowledge it, it kind of eats away at us.
Yeah, that's great. And kind of bouncing off of that concept, one of your antidotes that you mentioned is, I just titled it self-compassion. I think you used the word grace. And one of the techniques I've heard for that is try to treat yourself as if you were a close friend or family member who was confiding fear or worry in you. What advice would you give to that person? Treat yourself like you would treat that person, because we tend to be harder on ourselves, most of us, than we would be on anyone else. Can you talk a little about that concept, and maybe why we are so hard on ourselves, and why it is a challenge sometimes to give ourselves grace, even if we're typically gracious people to those around us?
Yeah, very common. I mean, we can somehow we can do that for others, and maybe we're almost been rewarded as a child for looking out for others' feelings, but no one has helped modeled for us good self-care, perhaps. Um, we feel selfish is another thing I sometimes hear. If I think about my own feelings or think about my own needs, somehow the message we've gotten is that's wrong or bad. You know, as somebody who enjoys and feels privileged to help others, I know if I don't take care of myself, then I'm not going to be worth a whole lot to somebody else. You know, if I'm run down or tired or not taking time with my family, then I'm going to be at risk for burning out. But so yeah, it's a good question. Why are we harder on ourselves? We just don't have practice at it sometimes, or we haven't been giving ourselves permission. So that's why, you know, this sort of check-in to recognize a negative thought or a harsh statement. Sometimes I'll offer somebody, you're really being hard on yourself, and they might say, you don't even know what it sounds like in my own head. You know, I don't even.
Yeah.
They'd almost be embarrassed to say it out loud. But so we start to tone that down a little bit and maybe understand it. So because that can feed stress and anxiety. You know, there's some stigma still about seeking help, and we feel ashamed for needing help. So we don't reach out to others. But you know, we feel privileged if somebody asks for help, right? We feel good if somebody says, "Hey, can I talk to you?" But yet we sometimes don't give ourselves the same permission to say, "I, you know, I need to talk to you," or "Hey, can I run something by you that I've been wrestling with?" And I think that still comes back to some shame, feeling inadequate, guilty, selfish. But I hope these check-ins and being aware of these feelings can help change those patterns.
Yeah, that's great. I've heard before that asking for advice is one of the highest compliments we can give someone. That makes us feel good when people ask for our advice and our help, and we can help them with that. That's a gift that we can give to others, is allow them into whatever challenges we're having, and be partnered in that with somebody. So that makes a lot of sense. We're going to wrap up with one more question, and it's a future-oriented question. So you talked a lot today about what should we be doing right now, and what are some of the practices and habits we should be in while we're still in this state of isolation. But the question is, when we are eventually past this, and I'll refrain from putting a time on that. So we'll just say when we're past this time of isolation and distancing and all these sorts of things, whenever that is, what lessons should we take from this time that we should be thinking about applying in the future when we're back to whatever normal is, when we're past this time of isolation? What should we be taking? What lessons should we be taking, or habits should we be applying that we're learning now that would be helpful to us in the future?
Yeah. Well, kind of like I said, we need to be a tourist in our own lives, you know, and take a different viewpoint, see our lives with new eyes. What's been working? What about this forced I don't even want to use the word isolation, forced slowing down and pausing? What actually has been beneficial? Maybe it means we are more intentional about reaching out to people close to us, and we don't take that for granted anymore. Maybe a new pattern evolves from this game night, or we find a hiking trail that we didn't know about and we start visiting that. What has it felt like to slow down? Some of that makes us antsy and uncomfortable, and we want to know, when's this going to end and when are we going to get back to normal? But we don't want to miss out on some of the benefits that have come from this. Certainly, I hope we hug more and you know, have more physical closeness, and be generous with our time, with our resources, generous with compliments and affirmations for each other. I think hopefully this has taught us to appreciate some of those things, and it'd be great if these new patterns continue in some way, and we don't just go back sort of to some of the detrimental things about pushing and rushing and not being able to have enough time to take inventory of our own self emotionally and physically. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and maybe even for the introverts, like you mentioned at the beginning, there's a lesson of you may have thought you liked isolation more than you did when it didn't become a choice, and maybe craving a little bit more of that connection, even if that's in your own way, would be a lesson you could take. So great. Well, Doug, thanks again for your time today. I think we all had a lot of takeaways, and appreciate you just being with us and guiding us through thinking through some of these things that we can be applying during this time. As Doug mentioned, we will be sending out a follow-up email to all of you who are on the webinar today that includes Doug's contact information if you have any follow-up questions for him or want to contact him about anything, as well as a list of some of these resources that Doug mentioned during his time. So thanks again to everybody for being a part of this today. Doug, thanks for your time, and we'll look forward to reconnecting with everyone again soon. So have a great evening, enjoy the beautiful weather, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Gary. Thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Doug.